Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 16th of December of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. So once again, according to information we have, the President of Ukraine Zelensky rejected the peace proposal that was provided by the United States of America. So the sources are saying that Ukraine did not accept Witkov's proposal to withdraw troops from Donbass at the negotiations in Berlin. So the Ukrainians are calling this different way. They're saying that 90% of questions and points were discussed and were agreed upon by the US and Ukrainian delegation, but there are still issues with the rest 10% of that peace plan. So most likely these 10% includes the territorial concession, the security guarantees, and of course the frozen Russian assets. So 10%, but these 10% are the most important one. And later Zelensky stated that now the ball is on the side of the Russian Federation. Now the delegation of the United States of America will travel to the Russian Federation, where they will have meeting with the President of the Russian Federation. Most likely during this upcoming meeting, the delegation of the United States of America and Russia will discuss everything that was discussed in Berlin. And then the US delegation will travel back to the United States of America, where most likely this upcoming weekend talks are going to take place on the territory of Miami. So too many travels through the world, but without any changes and without any progress. But Russians, before the US delegation visited the Russian Federation, made lots of very important statements. Most likely these are the messages to Ukraine and the messages to the United States of America. And if summarize everything that was stated today by the Russian authorities, don't waste your time if you are coming to the Russian Federation without these paragraphs. So let's discuss them. So the foreign minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, stated that the US has promised Russia not to accept Ukraine into NATO and to facilitate the transfer of territories. Now we need to remove these root causes. It's good that the Americans have understood this. They clearly said that there can be no NATO, and they clearly said that the lands where Russians have lived for centuries should become Russian again. That was stated by Sergei Lavrov. Furthermore, the press secretary, this spokesman Peskov, said that Russia is against a ceasefire that would give Ukraine a respite. He said that on idea of Christmas truce that was provided by the Chancellor of Germany, Merz. And the most important statements were made by the Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov in an interview with ABC News. He stated that the Ukrainian conflict is close to an end. Russia is ready for a deal and hopes that it will be concluded sooner rather than later. The conflict will end when Kiev's allies realize the inevitability of Moscow's victory. Russia is not ready for compromises on Donbass, Novorossiysk, and especially Crimea. Moscow firmly adheres to the understanding reached with the US at the summit in Anchorage. The US knows what compromises Russia is ready to make and what it cannot refuse. Putin has repeatedly explained this to Americans. Russia will not agree to the presence of NATO military on Ukrainian territory. The longer the conflict continues, the harder it will be to resolve it. In 2022, the parties were within inches of a solution. So as you can see, the Russians sent a message, and as I told you, this message sounds the next way. If you are not ready to confirm everything that was reached with the United States of America on Alaska, then there is no need to waste your time, and there is no need even to come to the Russian Federation. So of course, let's wait and see what is going to be next, and obviously the US delegation will travel to the Russian Federation, of course, but it seems that, as I told you, there would be lots of travels through the world, but without changes and without any progress. Now let's discuss the situation in the area of the special military operation and the area of the conflict in Ukraine. During the previous 24 hours, we received a very interesting video from the city of Novorossiysk. This is the military port of the Russian Federation. This video was published yesterday by Ukrainian Special Forces, and the Ukrainians claim that as a result of special operation, they managed to damage the Russian submarine on the territory of this port. And of course, that was a very interesting situation. obviously, and later we start receiving satellite pictures. So this is the first satellite picture that was made by neutral mappers and by pro-Ukrainian sources. Here we can see the shape of the Russian submarine and the place where the explosion took place. So as you can see, there is a gap, there is a distance between the submarine and the area of explosion, which means that's very likely that the Russian submarine wasn't damaged. Later we received another video, this one, where we can see the comparison between different, let's say, period of times. This is the moment after strike, and this is the moment before, and this is after strike. So as you can see, this is the submarine itself, and this is the place where explosion occurred. So as you can see, there is a gap, and most likely the submarine wasn't damaged. And later, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation published this video with the submarine, saying that everything is okay with submarine. Yes, there was an attack probably carried out by Ukrainians, but the submarine wasn't damaged. So, of course, the pro-Russian sources are saying that everything is okay with the submarine, that the submarine wasn't damaged. But telling the truth, we need to understand that it seems that Ukrainians or somebody, a third party behind Ukrainians, didn't want to attack the submarine itself. They attacked, let's say, the piers, they attacked the port infrastructure, they attacked right exactly this corner, but the submarine was just 2 meters before this corner. So obviously, as I understand, the Ukrainians or a third party who was behind the Ukrainians had good chances and had 100% chances to damage and to attack the Russian submarine, but for some reason they didn't do this. So it's like a message to the Russians. So we see we could do this, we could attack your submarine, and maybe this is not the only submarine through the world that could be attacked by our side, by Ukraine, or by a third party behind Ukraine. And the only reason why we didn't attack this submarine is because we don't want another escalation. We just wanted to show you our capabilities. So, telling the truth, I believe that the Ukrainians had chances to do this, but for some reason they decided to avoid. They just shown the Russians their capabilities. So this is the reality, most likely, and most likely this message was heard by Russians in Kremlin, because today we got report that the Russians are preparing themselves before another massive, large-scale attack that is going to take place maybe even this night between the 16th and the 17th of December of 2025. Massive attack with missiles, with drones through the territory of Ukraine, with lots of explosions, and most likely with lots of attacks on objects of critical infrastructure of Ukraine. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously the situation is worsening from day to day. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly in the area of the city of Gulay-Polye. According to these changes, that some of them were confirmed, some of them were just provided by different mappers, the Russians currently control up to 50% of the city of Gulay-Polye, and the Russians continue advancing. The Ukrainians, as we can see, are trying to stick as close as possible to the central and the western parts, so they're trying to stay as close as possible to the TO814 road and to the Shevchenko Street. As of now, it's very difficult to say how long the rest of the battle for Gulay-Polye will take time, but obviously the days are numbered. Another important thing is that the Russians managed to breach the Ukrainian defense in the northern parts along the R85 road in the river of Gaichul. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for the triangle of Gerasimovka, Andreevka, and Pishane. The Russians are advancing in this area, trying to improve their positions on the Ukrainian side of the river of Gaichul. And as we discussed during the previous videos, this is a very important foothold or bridgehead for the Russian forces, because from these positions, the Russians first of all can outflank and to outmaneuver the Ukrainian positions along this dense network of the fortifications, which called the defense of Zaporizhzhia, the Zaporizhzhia wall. And from these positions, the Russians can advance further in the western direction towards the city of Zaporizhzhia itself. So a very dangerous situation for Ukrainians, and as of now we see that Ukrainians are not able or are not stabilizing the situation at all. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the settlement of Novopavlovka. The Ukrainian sources are saying that during the previous 24 hours, the Russians launched another massive attack in this area using dozens of tanks, vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, and hundreds of soldiers. You know that we can see a snow in this area. Snow fell in this area several days ago, and now the temperature is getting, let's say, better and better. So that is why we can see a fog above this area as well. So that is why the Russians decided to use this advantageous situation, and they began offensive, sending more and more tanks and infantry in the direction of Novopavlovka. The Ukrainians are saying that they managed to destroy several tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, but the most important is that Russians managed to enter the settlement and to land infantry. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Novopavlovka. I would like to remind you that several weeks ago, the Russians made their first attempt to attack. They improved their positions down significantly, and now this is the second wave of attack. And most likely, this attack would be more resultive for the Russians in comparison with the previous one. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. We have just small adjustments in the southeastern part of the city of Mirnograd. This is the situation by the end of the 15th, and this is the 16th. We readjusted back the southeastern part. Several buildings were recolored back in Ukraine favor or as a gray zone. We came to this conclusion based on this video published by pro-Russian sources. Here we can see how Russians during the winter period of time were attacking temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area. So based on this video, we came to the conclusion that there are still positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the southeastern part of the city of Mirnograd. So that is why we expanded the gray zone basically in Ukrainian favor. Now let's discuss the situation in the Borova direction. This is the second area with the most important updates of the previous 24 hours. First of all, let's rewind updates for a day. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that the Russians launched their major offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Chasiv Yar. The Russians are trying to improve their positions. This information was confirmed by neutral mappers, by pro-Russian sources, and this information was confirmed by lots of videos and updates that came where they were published from this territory of how Russians were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine with FPV drones. So now we believe that the Russians are trying to attack the settlement with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area. As of the end of the 16th of December, we still haven't received anything that can confirm additional progress on the ground. But the Russian task is, we understand this task. If Russians are able to take the village of Chasiv Yar, then the distance between the settlement and the river Novorossiysk would be less than or around 7 kilometers. From these positions, Russians will be able to establish complete FPV drone control over the territory. Basically, they will create another kill zone without any chances for Ukrainians to bring additional supply and support to the city of Borova using these roads. And of course, Russians will continue offensive with the purpose to establish physical control over this bank of the river Novorossiysk. So this is the first offensive that was launched by Russians, and the second offensive was launched by Russians in the area of the villages of Boguslavka and Borova. There are very heavy clashes for this area, and this is the way how the map has been adjusted since the 14th of December of 2025. And the most important is that today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the settlement of Novoplatonovka was captured by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. So based on the report published by Russians, by the Ministry of Defense, we adjusted the map. So these are the changes between the 15th and the 16th of December. Now it's clear that Russians, as a result of this offensive operation, managed to encircle Ukrainians who are currently located on the Boguslavka, let's say, tactical zone. So these forces are encircled, and now the Russians will be focused to take this gap, to take this pocket under complete physical control. And when Russians take the village of Boguslavka under control, of course, they will try to attack the settlement of Borova itself. And now the picture, now we understand the entire picture. First, the Russians are trying to cut supply that goes from the city of Izum. So we are talking about this road of supply. First, Russians are trying to cut this area first with drones done physically. Then Russians will try to attack the settlement of Borova from the north. And if Russians are able to answer the settlement of Borova, then there are very high chances that the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine Ukraine who are currently located in these fields, and we're talking about thousands of Ukrainians, could be caught by the Russians in cauldron without any chances for evacuation. So let's call it the Borova offensive operation. The major Borova offensive operation begins, and during the next days we're going to receive lots of updates exactly from this area, and there are going to be very heavy clashes most likely. As for the city of Kupiansk, the Russians and the Ukrainians continue attacking each other. During the previous 24 hours, the map was adjusted. These are the changes between the dates. But the Russians began publishing information from their side. The Russians are saying that they are stabilizing the situation. Today, Russians published this video. This video was made by soldiers on the ground in the area of the city of Kupiansk. The buildings were geolocated. This is exactly the place where a Russian soldier was moving, and this Russian soldier stated that the situation in the city of Kupiansk is under complete control. There are very heavy clashes, but Russians control the situation. The video with the Russian soldier took place exactly at this point, and based on this video, we have recolored back this territory. So first we colored this territory according to neutral mappers, and by the evening we got a video that confirms Russian control over the territory. So as we can see, despite talks, despite statements and different reports published by Ukrainian side, we see that the Russians are not planning to fall back and to, let's say, give up these territories. They're going to fight for a very long time, because they see that Ukrainians, for this offensive, were forced to use forces from the Sumy direction, where the Russians also launched their offensive. As for the Volchansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians continue their attempts to improve their positions to the south of the settlement of Lyman. Now the Russians are trying to answer the village of Semenovka, and the Russians continue the battle for the settlement of Vilcha. Today, several sources reported that maybe the village of Vilcha would be captured by the Russians within the next several days. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.